so as Polly said, a technical debt, neither technical nor debt. So we just looking to extend the metaphor and understand a little bit about decision making. As Polly mentioned, I'm the VP of Architecture at Workhuman, a proud Irish company, of course, and I write occasionally on markgreville.ie. The first thing to say when we think about how individuals and groups make decisions, we all think we're rational, right? We all think we're rational people, but Herbert Simon introduced the idea of bounded rationality. And basically, rationality is bounded by a number of things. Humans aren't capable to perform the kind of almost infinite computations that are required for any reasonable decision. So we're bounded by time, we're bounded by the amount of brain power we can put into something, we're bounded by the length we can get down into each decision path. So instead what we use, we satisfy, or basically what we do is we use shortcuts, we use heuristics, and that helps us make sense of the environment around us. And so metaphors are one heuristic that can help. And they kind of offer a frame to assist understanding. So what is a metaphor, I suppose? Well, a metaphor, denotes one type of object in place of another to suggest a likeness. It's not an analogy. Noel already covered analogies with the Formula One, but it's a metaphor. And basically they give a mental model to aid understanding of a concept. So technical debt is a metaphor. TD, as it's called, technical debt. It's a metaphor. And Ward Cunningham introduced this metaphor in 1992. And basically, shipping first-time codes like going into debt, you have to pay it back promptly with a rewrite. And if you don't do that, you can be brought to a standstill under kind of unconsolidated debt and all kinds of stuff, right? And at the time, he was building a system called YCash, which was a financial product. And his manager didn't have much technical knowledge. So to bridge that gap, to give the manager a frame to help him understand, he used the metaphor of technical debt. And it was used in the context of object-oriented software. But I mean, it's been broadened since then. It's taken off like a house on fire. It's actually a simile. It's not a metaphor, but it just took off. It's been enormously successful in technology. And this is just from 2004 on, a Google interest over time. But I did a search yesterday. There were 310 million results on technical debt. So extraordinary. So then the metaphor, it helps us understand many things about technology delivery. But one really intriguing part is how it treats different types of technical debt. So there's three main papers, three main wide-ranging reviews of the subject across academics. Tom, 2013, Lee, 2015, and Alves, 2015. And they have differences of opinion on what constitutes technical debt. They all agree that code is certainly a big part, and there can be architectural technical debt, and they also agree that design technical debt and technical debt's in design. And then they fail to agree after that. Tom thinks that there's environmental debt, knowledge distribution debt. Lee then and Alves talk about infrastructure debt, documentation debt, requirements debt. And then Alves talks about things like people debt, process debt, usability debt even. And these are reviews. There's way more disagreement in the individual papers. So one really interesting thing to think about is technical debt actually debt? And when we think about the concept of debt, debt is 5,000 years old. David Graeber has a great book called Debt, the First 5,000 Years. But really importantly, financial debt is predictable. So you can calculate it based on, as I say there, principal, interest rate, and term, understandable, common across languages and cultures and countries. So how does technical debt match up? Well, for technical debt, first of all, there's no agreement on the principle. We saw earlier on, there's even disagreement on where technical debt exists in technology, whether it's limited to code or wider concerns. There's no interest rate. Negroho has a excellent paper talking about designing a rebuild value and a rework function. But one key variable, which is they call the refactoring adjustment, and it's some type of idea of a percentage or a number that can be used to figure out how you refactor. It relies solely on someone's expert judgment. So it's absolutely not going to be easy to define, and there's differences of opinion between different experts on what the number means. And because it's refactoring, it's based primarily around code as well. So there's no interest rate. And there's also no concept of term. So Schmidt in his paper talks about future development as part of understanding technical debt. So you have to be able to see into the future in some indeterminate way to be able to calculate. So it does not match up in any of those three. But then not only is it not debt, but it also goes beyond the bounds of technology as well. Paulie mentioned we've been working on this quite a bit, and we've reviewed well over 100 papers at this stage on technical debt, and technical debt can have impacts which are both positive and negative. It can have impacts in organizations on financial metrics, also on market. And if we think about organizations, it can have a positive impact on your reputation. You can get a reputation for taking on debt and moving fast. It can also have a negative impact on reputation, where you might have maybe an issue or maybe a security issue because of technical debt, and that hurts your reputation. For finance turnover, if you take on no technical debt, it can mean that it's maybe a very conservative, slow-moving organization who favors perfection. And for those staff who like to get things done and have a sense of achievement, that can cause disillusionment. But on the flip side, if you have an enormous amount of technical debt, what actually happens is it becomes more and more difficult to get things done for a different reason, because you're just laden with so much debt. And that also causes disillusionment as well. And then finally, if we think about in markets, particularly in digital companies, first mover advantage is enormous. And sometimes it's once somebody makes the first move, it's very hard to catch them. So taking on a lot of technical debt to get that first mover advantage is often a fantastic choice. However, if you have a lot of architectural debt, for example, it may be impossible to move at the same speed your competitors do. So again, how you manage technical debt and what types of identification you use for technical debt has a very far-reaching impact in a company. So if we think about how companies look at themselves, Elkington introduced in 1997 a great book called Cannibals with Forks, introduced this concept of a triple bottom line. And this was taken on by Dillick and Muff, and this is their topology here. And they talk about an outside-in perspective. So they talk about looking at the triple bottom line, which refers to profit, people, and the planet, and how they look at sustainability of their business and sustainability in a more broad sense. And so what we've done is we've actually expanded the topology to take into account the economic, the social, and the environmental concerns that companies now have and now look at. So if we think about very quickly environmental factors, Bitcoin, a paper by Constantinos, talks about how Bitcoin uses more electricity in a year than the whole country of Iceland. There are many papers on the social impact of technology, so social media causing discontent and social disruption. And economics as well. And I can talk about a story from my own career where I worked at Bank of America for a long number of years. And the CEO, Brian Moynihan, one day in a town hall said that our focus was going to be on protecting the financial health of our customers. I'm not at Bank of America, I shouldn't say our, but protecting the financial health of Bank of America's customers, rather than trying to extract as much value from them, because a healthy customer base means a healthy economy, means the need for more banks. Less healthy customers or no customers, no need for banks anymore. So the wider economy has become part of the paradigm that people think about now when they think about technical debt. or when they think about their business, and technical debt affects that if you're using any type of technology. So finally, is technical debt technical or debt? Well, I don't think it's really debt as such. Technical debt is a metaphor. It shouldn't be taken too directly for that. And is it technical? Technical debt, it's actually the concern of everybody, both inside and sometimes even outside of business, depending on what it is. Thank you very much. I don't know how long that took, or if I'm under or over time, Paddy, but...
Good man, you're bang on 10 minutes, Mark. So you've a planned to a T, prepared to a T. Mark, very, very interesting. So I suppose just for those maybe not in the technology space, what you're saying really, or what I understand from what you're saying, is that we all need to be aware of the decisions that people make in relation to technology have a bearing, an impact on all of our organizations, and not just our organizations, but actually beyond our organizations. So are there examples, Mark, you can give just for those to know that maybe not may not be as aware of technical debt, of examples of where organizations at the moment take on technical debt?
Yeah, absolutely, Boddy. Thank you. So examples of where organizations take on technical debt. So I talked a little bit about the market and market opportunities, but particularly, for example, there's a great example in Facebook and the MySpace kind of era of social networks, where Facebook took on a lot of technical debt and built a lot of stuff and threw it away and used a lot of open source technologies. And they were constantly refactoring and basically making that first mover advantage to scale. MySpace took a slightly different turn, and they went with a more predictable technology stack based on .NET. But what actually happened is they failed to scale after that. It caused them more and more and more problems. So they held on to an old stack based on Cold Fusion, which is a programming paradigm long in the past. And instead of taking on technical debt, instead of taking on more risk to react to Facebook, they didn't do that. And when I say to take on technical debt, what I mean is to do something in an incomplete fashion, to do something to make a major compromise in Facebook's case, in the technology delivery, just to get you a short-term payback. And then you will pay that back over the long term. So that's maybe one example there. And I probably didn't talk about the decision making so much, but I just brought this diagram of the topology back, because to make decisions in a company, it's important to understand. It's important that everyone understands, and they begin to think about, if I'm going to take on technical debt, what can it impact? So it's really important that technologists inside, so technologists in here, in the business activities, who are deciding to, in this ring here, to take on technical debt, they need to understand, are there organizational consequences? Are there organizational advantages we're getting? Are there financial consequences and advantages? Are there market consequences and advantages that we're going to take on here? And similarly, with people outside, they should also be thinking the same thing. Business people should be able to have that shared language, because shared language allows the communication. And then similarly, they should be able to think about the economic consequences, the social consequences, the environmental consequences. There's a fascinating paper and talks about CUBS, COMPAS, and it's a system in the US that's used to detect who's going to reoffend in prison. And it shows actually that Black people were getting a higher risk rating than was justified in the real world. And actually white people were getting a lower than justified risk rating as well, because there had been a bias built into the software that had been installed and had been tested and used to do this. And that bias is part of technical debt, right? It's an incomplete it's an incomplete implementation. And there's looked at a number of factors there, but that certainly has a major social consequence. So it's really, really important, I think, for people outside of the IT department to understand that people often make these decisions in isolation, technologists, and they make them for technical reasons. But that's not good enough, and it can have really, really major impacts.
Mm. And Mark, I suppose, yeah, in the last number of years, there's far more attention being given to the external environment. But from your experience, are organizations really, really prepared to consider in a meaningful way people, profit, planet, and in particular people and planet?
So I can talk about the two organizations. I can talk about Workhuman, which I'm in at the moment. And I mean, Workhuman is a hugely social conscious organization. It's about, I mean, the name, Workhuman, it's about name. And we and all of the executive and most of the staff, I think possibly are very, very interested in making sure that society as a whole prospers in the right way, and that's a big component of our vision and what drives our mission as a company. And I mentioned earlier on about Bank of America. I think having gone through the financial crises, they certainly pay some attention to social upheaval, because that's bad for business at the end of the day. They also pay attention to environmental concerns, because that's bad for business, and they particularly pay attention to economic concerns. That's the primary one. Now, I would say, just to go back to Workhuman for a second, we also, environmental and economic, particularly environmental, are strong drivers for us too, but social would be a stronger one than that. For Bank of America, economic, of course, is the stronger one. They are determined that there is a strong economy, because what you're doing, if you basically take interest from today, you have to pay that back later on. And if you're destroying the economy to some degree to make a short-term benefit as a huge bank like that, you're going to pay, because there just won't be the customers later on. Now, I'm not saying, Paddy, that every company is doing this. And triple bottom line, Elkington, it's been well received in some spots and not as well received in others. But there is a broad move in sustainability. Even in the OECD, we can see these kind of things happening now. And I think there's also a broad realization that society is impacted in many, many, many ways by technology. And it's really, really important. We can see AI governance, we can see all types of things starting to be discussed now. And I think that's overdue, needed, and vital for the future.
Very good, and a very strong case for when we are doing digital transformation. We're making decisions, related to technology, that you're really advocating that we need to look beyond it as a piece of technology to the impact it has across the organization. I see Ken here, and there's questions zipping past on the chat here, Mark, but Ken is saying, should we also be considering political, legal, regulatory debt?
Yeah, it's a good, the pestle. It's a great call, Ken, and I think for the wider political, that's probably not come up as much in the literature, in this particular literature. Although political is obviously, I mean, economic. It's obviously very influenced by economic and social, particularly, and maybe at. And I see Noel says you have me at Herbert Simon. Thank you, Noel. I'm a big fan, actually. Yeah, absolutely. Social and economic are big drivers of political. Legal, again, I'm not sure if legal is lagging a little bit behind on some of these. Particularly, technology is moving so fast now that it generally takes legal frameworks and whatnot a while to catch up to that. But it's a great suggestion, Ken, and maybe it's something that we need to consider, legal and political. So maybe I need to go back to the literature and take a deeper look at those two.
Yeah, no, fantastic. and I think a lot of takeaway, something that really caught my attention, Mark, maybe we'll finish on, is that Bitcoin now is using more electrical power than the whole island of Iceland, and again, these decisions sometimes are made and we don't consider the impact that these have, and that is a design decision, Mark, I think, in terms of how the whole Bitcoin architecture was designed, and is it only that it can only take so many transactions per second? Is it 6 or 7? I think,
That's
Mark.
right.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and again, we need to be aware of these decisions. Mark, thanks a million for your presentation. Really enjoyed it, and also looking forward to. And that's maybe a point as well. I know when we look at let's say last year's crew that have gone through this program, I think we had about half a dozen of the people that had presented during those seminars, the participants in those seminars that went on to writing papers that were accepted within academic outlets. And I know you're well on the way to doing something similar here, Mark, as are others presenting today. And I think it's a really important point that this is, this is research that's done by practitioners, but is of a standing, an academic standing, So well done, Mark.
Thank you, buddy.
Yeah.